The first high-level visit from Australia after the new government took over. I'm being joined by none other than the Deputy Prime Minister and Defence Minister of Australia, Mr. Richard Marles. Many thanks for joining us here on India Today.
Great to be here.
There was a lot of apprehension that the new government will not be as close to New Delhi as the earlier administration, that there'll be a shift in Australia's India policy. You and your visit seems to put that to rest. Is that the case? What's on the agenda?
Well, I think coming to India so soon after the election is very much trying to make a statement about how importantly we regard our relationship with India. I actually think that if you look over the last 20 years, you've seen a real shift in Australia in terms of the importance that we've placed on our relationship with India. We've been well served by a couple of West Australian foreign ministers in Stephen Smith and Julie Bishop, who have made it clear to us how important is the Indian Ocean, how our security interests are tied up in the Indian Ocean, and how many economic opportunities there are here. And all of those roads lead to India. And really, if you look at the trajectory of the relationship between Australia and India, there's a continuity between the last government and our government. And we really see that we're on the cusp of actually that trajectory going to the next level. And we're really excited about the prospect of what the relationship between Australia and India holds for the future.
We see a lot of economic cooperation between the two countries. We're looking at enhancing trade ties, but on the defense front, the strategic front, while being a part of the Quad, there is a lot of cooperation, but bilaterally, are we looking or can we expect some important defense engagement agreements, exercises between the two countries?
Completely, and it is right to highlight the economic engagement, but might I say in respect of that, as a former trade minister, we see India going into the middle of this century as potentially being the largest economy on the planet. Like, there is a huge opportunity for Australia engaging with India in an economic sense. We've seen more of it with the trade agreement, but it's really a start, and our Trade Minister Don Farrell was meeting with his Indian counterpart in Geneva in the last week, talking about ways in which we can actualise that. But you're right, I think increasingly the defence pillar will be a critical part of the bilateral relationship. And really, in that sense, my visit here is about looking at ways in which we can strengthen and deepen the operational engagement between our respective defence forces, participation in more exercises. Australia participates in Exercise Malabar, which has really been initiated by India. But the Indian Air Force will be coming to Darwin in the next couple of months to participate in Exercise Pitch Black, which is our premier Air Force exercise. And you'll see more of that kind of engagement. A greater frequency, but a much greater complexity of engagement. We really are engaging at the very highest end in terms of the way our militaries are operating, and we see that as critically important.
Minister, sir, very early to ask you because, this is a new government, you're just here, but any agreements in the offing?
Well, I think what we will see is a defence relationship where there'll be lots of agreements in respect of a range of areas of engagement. We need to obviously move at a pace which is comfortable for both countries, but what you can see is a real commitment on both sides, on the Indian and in the Australian side, of trying to deepen that relationship and seeking to have us work more closely together. And for us, we see that as something which is really advantageous to both countries.
The main thrust also is a secure, inclusive Indo-Pacific. On that front, are there any new proposals or ideas that both countries are looking at? Because we know one part is countering China, and I'll come to that, but any specific areas of cooperation on the Indo-Pacific?
Well, I think we see ourselves, Australia, as an Indian Ocean country to start with. We see India as the leader here, and we seek to work with India and have India as our guide in terms of the way in which we operate in the Indian Ocean. But if you look at a country like Sri Lanka right now, which is obviously facing a whole lot of difficulties, our Home Affairs Minister is in Sri Lanka at this moment, seeking to look at ways in which Australia can help Sri Lanka in this moment. But for us, India is the guide. We want to be helping there within the framework of the assistance that India is giving, and to make sure that we're working closely with India in terms of how we can help Sri Lanka. And I think it's a really good example of how we can work with India in our engagement in the Indian Ocean, and that applies through Southeast Asia, it applies in the Pacific, and in different parts, be it India or Australia, one of us might play more of a leadership role, but in fact I think our relationship is very complementary across the Indo-Pacific, and we can gain a lot by working closely together.
I'm glad you mentioned Sri Lanka, because a lot of leaders would not have looked at the Indian Ocean and specifically the crisis, because Sri Lanka today is an example of what China can and cannot do, or how things go bad with the debt traps. So coming to China, in the Indian Ocean, we see a lot of countries where there is an increasing influence of China. Sri Lanka has suffered at the hands of China. There are other countries who are headed that way, India certainly not. But what are ways to counter China in these waters? Countries that are part of these waters.
Well, I think you're right to use the term debt trap. We've seen that kind of relationship be built by China with countries in the Pacific, and with the same consequence. And it highlights, I think, the need or the opportunity for Australia and India to work together for the betterment of a whole lot of countries within the Indo-Pacific. China presents a whole lot of, and Chinese behaviour presents a whole lot of strategic challenges for Australia. It certainly does for India. At the same time, obviously, China is our largest economic partner, as it is for India. This is complex. How you reconcile those two things is not obvious. So the starting point is that this is a moment to be sharing notes, comparing notes with friends, and India is very much that, is a close friend. So I think what it highlights is the strategic alignment between Australia and India, which has probably never been closer or more aligned than it is right now. And so working together in terms of comparing notes about how we deal with this is really important. I think working closely together in a security sense offers a real opportunity to promote security within the Indo-Pacific. And as I said earlier, I think working closely together to compare notes about how we deal with particular countries in respect of this is also an area of great opportunity.